It's funny how trust can make you blind. For 12 years, I thought I had a stable marriage. Nothing fancy, nothing wild, just normal. I'm a teacher in Des Moines, Iowa. My husband, Robert, drives long haul for a freight company. He's on the road most of the week, home on weekends, and for the longest time, I thought that distance kept our marriage healthy. We had our rhythm. I handled the house and the kids, and he handled the bills and his routes. Every month, like clockwork, Robert sent $300 to what he called his half-sister, Marlene. She supposedly lived in Kansas City and had kidney problems. I'd see the note on his banking app, M. Brooks, medical expenses. I never questioned it. Honestly, I even admired him for being that kind of man. You know the type, quiet, responsible, doing good things without talking about them. If someone had told me back then that this generous habit would destroy our marriage, I would have laughed. Back then, it felt like one of those little things that proved he was a good man. When we'd sit at the kitchen table balancing our budget, he'd sigh and say, "It's tough for her, Ev. She doesn't have anyone else." And I'd nod, because I didn't want to be the kind of wife who questioned kindness. That's what's dangerous about loyalty. It makes you explain away everything. I used to brag about him to my coworkers. My husband helps his sister every month. I'd say, sipping coffee in the teacher's lounge, like it was a medal of honor. They'd smile and say, "You've got a good one." Yeah, that's what I thought too. He'd come home late on Fridays, exhausted but smiling. Sometimes he'd have small gifts for the kids, a baseball cap for Noah, a new set of colored pencils for Lisa. He'd hug me, smell faintly of road dust and coffee, and say, "You holding up okay?" And I always said yes. I mean, what was there to complain about? We had a roof, 2 healthy kids, and a man who sent money to his sick sister. That sounded like a blessing, not a problem. The truth is, life was so predictable it felt safe. I woke up at 6, packed lunches, taught 3rd graders how to read, came home, graded papers, and waited for Robert's calls. He'd check in from truck stops, send photos of sunsets on the highway, tell me about the weird diners he found. He made it all sound so ordinary. There was never a reason to doubt a word of it. One night, over dinner with a friend, she asked casually, "How's Robert's sister doing?" I froze for a second, then laughed. "Still sick, I guess." It sounded strange coming out of my mouth. I realized I'd never actually met Marlene, not once in 12 years. Never talked to her on the phone. Never even seen a photo. My friend smiled, half joking, half curious. 12 years and you've never met her? She must be a real mystery woman. I brushed it off, but that little comment stuck with me. On the way home, I caught myself thinking about it. I couldn't even remember what kind of illness she supposedly had. Kidney disease? Or was it something else? Robert mentioned it once, years ago, and I just accepted it as fact. That's how much I trusted him. It's strange, looking back now. The signs were there, subtle, quiet, easy to miss. The extra trips, the second phone, for work. The way he'd get defensive when I asked about his route changes. But when you love someone, you tell yourself stories that make you feel better. I told myself he was tired, that he was under pressure, that men just needed space. Sometimes I'd sit on the couch with the kids watching TV, and when his name popped up on my phone, I'd smile without thinking. "Hey, honey," I'd say, while muting the volume. He'd ask about the kids, about dinner, about little things. It all sounded so normal. I didn't know that behind every, "How was your day?" he was living another one somewhere else. The weird thing is, it wasn't a big event that made me suspicious. It was boredom. When life becomes too routine, you start to notice the gaps. I started seeing things that didn't quite fit, like how his mileage never matched the distance he said he drove, or how his paycheck sometimes came late. But still, I didn't ask. I didn't want to sound paranoid. That's how betrayal works. It grows quietly in the background while you convince yourself everything's fine. At school, I taught my students about honesty, about telling the truth even when it's hard. I never realized how much that word honesty had already slipped out of my own home. One night, while balancing our bank statement, I noticed another $300 transfer. Same date, same name. For a moment, I almost smiled. It felt familiar, predictable, safe. Then something in me hesitated. Maybe it was the way the note said, M. Brooks, expenses, instead of medical. It was such a small change, but it made me pause. I stared at it for a long minute. Then I just closed the laptop. I didn't want to think about it. Later that night, when Robert called, his voice was the same, calm, sweet, routine. You okay, Ev? He asked. Yeah, I said, staring at the closed laptop. I'm fine. Oh. But that was the first time I knew I wasn't. That moment right there when something tiny suddenly feels wrong, that's where the story really begins. If you've ever trusted someone so much that you ignored your own instincts, tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you like real cheating stories and revenge stories based on true life, hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of Evelyn's story. Because what came next didn't just break a marriage, it exposed a life I never knew existed. The next morning, I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling. It sat in my chest like a dull ache that wouldn't go away. I remember standing in the kitchen, making coffee, watching the steam rise while the house was still quiet. For a moment, I thought about checking the bank account again, but I didn't. I just stood there, staring at the mug, pretending that everything was fine. Pretending was easier. Robert called around 8, right on schedule. Morning, sweetheart, he said, his voice light, like he was smiling. Just heading out to Wichita today. Long drive. I said. Drive safe, because that's what I always said. I didn't ask questions, and he didn't offer answers. That day at school, I went through the motions: attendance, reading practice, math drills, but my mind was somewhere else. Every time I looked at my students, I thought about trust, about how we tell kids that telling the truth makes everything better. Adults lie all the time, and we call it protecting someone. When I got home, his route tracker app popped up on my phone. It was something we used when he started the job, mostly for safety, in case he had an accident. I tapped it without thinking. It showed his truck was parked at a rest stop outside Kansas City. Kansas City, not Wichita. I told myself it was probably a detour, a fuel stop, something ordinary, but my hands were shaking when I closed the app. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind outside rattled the windows, and I kept hearing the faint ping of his texts. Good night, Ev. Miss you. Words that used to make me smile now felt hollow. I didn't answer right away. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like his wife. I felt like someone watching her own life from the outside. The next morning, I did something small but different. I checked his drawer. Not snooping exactly. Just looking. Inside, under his folded shirts, was a box of receipts and trip logs. I found gas slips, hotel bills, truck stop invoices. Most matched his usual routes, but one stood out. Red Roof Inn, Kansas City, Mo. The date lined up perfectly with the last Wichita trip. I sat there on the edge of the bed, holding the paper, staring at his handwriting on the signature line. I felt stupid for shaking, but I couldn't stop. When he came home that weekend, everything looked normal. He hugged me, kissed my forehead, said, "Smells good in here." I smiled, like always, and handed him his plate of chicken and mashed potatoes. My voice didn't even crack when I asked, "How was Wichita?" He smiled, not missing a beat. Long drive. Got caught in some traffic outside Tulsa. I nodded and said, "That explains the delay." And he went right on eating. I watched him chew his food and thought, how many times have you lied sitting in that exact chair? It's strange how you can live with someone for years and suddenly see them as a stranger. That weekend, everything he did felt rehearsed: the way he folded his laundry, the way he laughed at the TV, the way he brushed his teeth humming that same song. I kept wondering which version of him was real, the man at my table, or the one checking into a hotel in Kansas City. On Sunday night after he went to bed, I sat in the living room with my laptop. I searched the address from the receipt. Red Roof Inn, Kansas City. Then I typed Marlene Brooks, Kansas City, into Facebook. Nothing came up right away, but I noticed one profile, Marlene B., with a little girl in her profile picture. The girl was maybe 12, smiling, missing a front tooth. The caption read, "Happy birthday to my sunshine, Haley." It meant nothing, at least not yet, but I stared at that picture longer than I should have. The next morning, I almost forgot to delete the search history. Almost. Life kept rolling forward like nothing had happened. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the same routine. I drove the kids to school, taught my classes, graded papers at night, but inside, something had shifted. I started noticing everything. How he'd check his phone in the hallway, how he'd smile when a text came in, how he'd excuse himself during dinner to call dispatch. Oh. One evening, I walked into the laundry room while he was on the phone. He turned his back immediately, his tone soft and low. I didn't hear what he said, but I caught one word, baby. He never called me that. He hung up fast when he saw me and said, "Work call." I said, "They call you baby now?" He froze for half a second, then laughed. "You misheard me. I said maybe." I smiled. "Right, maybe." He changed the subject, kissed my cheek, and walked away. My cheek still felt cold after he left the room. That night, I sat on the couch long after everyone went to bed. I kept thinking about that Facebook photo, the girl's smile, the name Marlene. I didn't have proof yet, not solid proof, but I had a feeling, and that feeling was louder than logic. You don't need a smoking gun to know when something's gone wrong. Sometimes the truth leaks out in small details, a change of word, a pause too long, a smile too quick. By Thursday, I'd made up my mind. Not about leaving him, not yet, but about finding out the truth. I deserved to know who he was sending money to every month and why he couldn't tell me the truth. I still remember the moment clearly. I stood in front of the mirror, holding that hotel receipt in one hand and my car keys in the other, trying to decide which version of my life I wanted to believe. The woman in the mirror looked calm, but her hands were trembling. That was the first time I realized I wasn't scared of the truth anymore. I was scared of how much of my life might be built on lies. And when Robert kissed me goodbye the next morning and said, "Love you, Ev," I finally understood something that had taken me years to see. Sometimes love isn't what someone says. It's what they hide. It was a Saturday afternoon when I found the card. Nothing dramatic, just me doing laundry like I always did. Robert had tossed his jacket on the chair, and I was emptying the pockets before throwing it in the wash. I pulled out a receipt, some change, a crumpled fast food napkin, and then a small envelope with a child's handwriting on it. At first, I thought it was something from one of our kids. Maybe a note Lisa had slipped into his bag. But when I turned it over, I saw a bright blue sticker that said "Happy Birthday" and 2 hearts drawn in pink marker. The handwriting was shaky, definitely a kid's, but not one of ours. I opened it, smiling for a second before my eyes stopped on the words, "Happy birthday to the best dad ever. Love, Marlene and Haley." My stomach dropped so fast it actually hurt. I stared at that sentence until the letters blurred. Best dad ever. My brain couldn't process it. Robert only had one child, our daughter Lisa. So who exactly was Haley? I read it again, slower this time, hoping I was missing something. Maybe it was a joke. Or maybe Haley was Marlene's daughter, and she just called Robert Dad as a sweet nickname. But the handwriting was careful, personal, like something written by a little girl who actually meant it. When Robert came home that night, I had already decided not to confront him right away. I wanted to see how he'd react on his own. He came through the door, humming, dropped his keys in the bowl, and gave me that same easy smile he always did. I said, "You get any mail today?" He said, "Nothing important." "Why?" I just shrugged. "No reason." He didn't even flinch. The calmness almost made me doubt myself. Later that evening, while he was in the shower, I placed the card on the kitchen table, right next to his wallet. I wanted him to see it without me saying a word. I sat in the living room, pretending to grade papers, waiting. He came out 15 minutes later, wearing his usual t-shirt and sweats, towel around his neck. When he saw the card, he froze for half a second, so quick most people wouldn't notice. But I did. Then he picked it up and laughed. "Oh, that," he said casually, setting it down. "Marlene's kid wrote that for her. She meant to send it to her dad, but she mixed up the envelopes. You know how kids are." His tone was light, natural, like the story made perfect sense. But something in his eyes flickered just for a second, then gone. I nodded slowly. "Zo Haley's hair daughter?" "Yeah," he said, turning to grab a soda from the fridge. Cute kid. Always sending silly things like that. I smiled, pretending to believe him, but inside, I felt the first real crack in the wall of our marriage. That night in bed, I stared at the ceiling for hours, listening to him breathe. My brain kept looping the same thought. Why would a little girl call my husband Dad? The next morning, I woke up early, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table staring at that card again. The handwriting was too deliberate to be a mix-up. It wasn't something a child randomly wrote for the wrong man. Kids don't make that kind of mistake. Lisa came downstairs, still half asleep, and said, "Mom, why are you staring at a birthday card?" I forced a smile. "Just something funny from Dad's truck." She nodded, poured herself cereal, and didn't ask more. I was thankful for that. The rest of the day, I moved around like I was underwater. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Every word Robert said, every laugh, every little gesture, suddenly it all felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced being my husband. At dinner, he talked about his next trip. "Might be out for 4 days this time," he said, cutting his steak. "There's a new route they're testing." "Where to?" I asked. He hesitated just a moment too long. "Same place, Wichita." That pause told me everything I needed to know. I said, "You should take that jacket I washed for you. Looks new again." "Thanks, honey," he said, smiling. "You always take care of me." He kissed my cheek, and I smiled back. But all I could think about was the card sitting in the kitchen drawer. I couldn't throw it away. It felt like evidence of what I didn't know yet, but I couldn't let it go. That night, while he slept, I looked at him in the dark. The man lying beside me was the same one who fixed our leaky faucet, who taught our son to ride a bike, who once held my hand through surgery. And yet, I couldn't stop wondering what else he was capable of lying about. The next day, at work, I caught myself zoning out in the middle of a lesson. One of my students asked, "Mrs. Carter, are you okay?" And I realized I hadn't heard a word anyone said for the past 5 minutes. At lunch, I called my sister, Caroline. We don't talk much, but she's the only person I could trust with something like this. I told her about the card, my voice shaking. She was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Ev, maybe it's nothing, but maybe it's something. You need to find out which." That night, I took her advice. When Robert went to bed, I opened his laptop. I wasn't proud of it, but my hands moved before my conscience could stop me. His email was already signed in. I searched Marlene. Only one result popped up: a transfer confirmation from the bank, $300. The same note, M. Brooks, medical expenses. It wasn't much, but now it looked different, more deliberate. I sat there, staring at that screen, realizing that every good deed might have been something else entirely. Something I didn't want to name yet. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and stood in the dark kitchen. For the first time, I couldn't tell whether I was the wife of a good man or the last person to find out who he really was. The next few days felt heavier, like the air in the house had changed, and I was the only one who noticed. Robert moved through his routine as if nothing was different. Coffee at 7, truck engine running by 8, a quick kiss before leaving. But now, every time he touched me, my body went tense. I couldn't unsee that birthday card. I couldn't unknow what I'd read. I stopped asking questions. It wasn't fear exactly, it was caution. I wanted to listen, to watch, to see what he'd reveal on his own. The thing about liars is, if you stay quiet long enough, they start to fill the silence themselves. That Friday night, he called from the road. "Bad weather," he said. "Might stop overnight." I looked out the window. The sky was clear. "Where are you?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. He hesitated. "Ugh, near Topeka." That was only 2 hours away. I didn't tell him I could see his truck's GPS ping sitting in Kansas City. I just said, "Be safe," and hung up. My heart was pounding, not from shock anymore, but from confirmation. I didn't need to imagine things. He was lying. Easily, smoothly, like he'd done it 100 times before. That night, I sat in the living room with a glass of wine, trying to replay our last few years in my head. The missed anniversaries, the extra shifts. The second phone I once found in his glove box that he swore was for dispatch calls only. At the time, I'd believed him because that's what wives do. You believe the person you love even when your gut whispers otherwise. The whispers were getting louder. The next morning, he came home early, smiling, carrying flowers. "Surprise," he said, kissing me on the cheek. I wanted to make it back for breakfast. I smiled and took the bouquet. Lilies, my favorite. He remembered. That hurt more than if he hadn't. I asked, "How was Topeka?" He said, "Rainy." Then looked right at me, waiting for my reaction. I gave him nothing. He smiled again and said, "You look tired, Ev." I wanted to tell him that pretending everything was fine was exhausting, but I just said, "It's been a long week." We ate in silence, the kind that isn't peaceful but sharp, like something waiting to break. Later, while he showered, I checked the truck receipts he'd left on the counter. The top one was from a diner in Kansas City. Dated last night. The waitress's name was circled at the bottom, Marlene. My hands went cold. That was the moment I stopped doubting myself. I folded the receipt and slid it into my purse. Then I went to the garage and looked at his truck. Nothing unusual, except the passenger seat was reclined farther than he ever kept it. There was a small pink hair tie on the floor. I picked it up, held it in my hand. It looked like something a teenage girl would wear. I stood there for a long time, staring at that little piece of elastic. It wasn't proof in court, but it was proof to me. That evening, Robert acted like everything was normal. He grilled steaks in the backyard, joked with our son, played fetch with the dog. Watching him felt surreal. It was like looking at an actor performing my husband. Every word, every gesture, perfectly timed. When the kids went to bed, he sat beside me on the couch. "You're quiet lately," he said. "Just tired," I replied. He looked at me for a second too long. "You're not mad, are you?" I smiled faintly. "Why would I be mad?" He shrugged, leaned back and said, "Sometimes you overthink things." That line, that tone. It was how men gaslight women without even realizing it. Make them question their own sanity just enough to keep control. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to his breathing, steady and calm, like a man with nothing to hide. I wanted to shake him awake and scream, "Who is she?" But instead, I stared at the ceiling, repeating the same words in my head: don't react, just observe. The next day, I started keeping a notebook. Not because I planned to use it for anything dramatic, but because I needed to keep my mind straight. I wrote down every transaction, every route, every excuse. Dates, cities, details. Seeing it all laid out on paper made it real, and that was terrifying. By the end of the week, the pattern was undeniable. Every time he said Wichita, his receipts said Kansas City. Every extra day on the road matched a cash withdrawal or a dinner for two. One afternoon, while he was gone, I logged into our joint account again. There it was, another $300 transfer to M. Brooks. Same note. Medical expenses. The same lie, running like clockwork. I stared at that name, M. Brooks, and whispered it out loud. Marlene Brooks. I wondered what kind of person she was. Was she in on it? Did she know I existed? Or was she another woman being lied to by the same man? A week later, Robert came home with a story about a new company policy requiring more overnight stays. I smiled, nodded, played along. But inside, I felt something shift completely. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't even angry yet. I was just done being blind. That evening, he went to shower again, and I found myself standing in front of his laptop. My reflection on the black screen looked calm, almost detached. I lifted the lid and waited for it to wake up. The email notifications popped up one by one. Bank confirmations, shipping updates. Then one subject line caught my eye. Joint account holder added, M. Brooks. My throat went dry. I opened it. The message was short, formal, and impossible to misread. You have successfully added M. Brooks as a joint account holder. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. He had built something permanent with her. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just sat there, staring at his name and hers together on the screen. My hands were shaking, but not from fear this time. It was clarity. Pure, painful clarity. I closed the laptop quietly, walked to the window, and looked out at the street. The world outside was calm, ordinary, the same as always. But inside, everything had changed. And for the first time in my marriage, I knew I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. I don't remember sitting down. One moment I was standing in the kitchen, and the next, I was staring at the laptop screen like it had just told me someone died. The email was simple, almost boring. You've added a new joint account holder, Monsieur Brooks. No emotion, no explanation, just confirmation that my husband had tied our finances to another woman. It felt like getting punched without warning. I just sat there, reading it over and over. I wasn't even crying. I was quiet. Too quiet. That's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's a dull, heavy silence that fills your lungs until you forget how to breathe. I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe joint account didn't mean what I thought it did. So I logged into the bank portal. There it was again, in plain text. Joint account holder. Marlene Brooks, Kansas City, Mo. I could see every transaction, every monthly transfer, every small purchase attached to that name. Coffee shops, restaurants, and one payment labeled Brooks Tailoring and Design. Tailoring? Design? My husband could barely sew a button. That was the moment when something inside me hardened. Not rage, not tears, just a cold, sharp line between who I was before that click and who I was now. When Robert came home that evening, I acted normal. I made dinner. I even asked about his trip to Wichita. He said it was long but fine, and then asked if I'd checked the mail. I told him yes, smiling. After dinner, he kissed my forehead, thanked me for the meal, and went to watch TV. I sat across from him, pretending to scroll on my phone, but every sound in the room felt too loud. His laugh, the commercials, the clink of his soda can. The normalcy made me nauseous. When he went to bed, I stayed up and opened the laptop again. I stared at that account for a long time, memorizing the dates and amounts. Then I wrote them down in my notebook. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew I'd need the truth in writing. The next morning, I woke up early and stood by the window as he loaded his truck. He waved before leaving, like always. I waved back. It hit me, then he probably waved to her too. Maybe even used the same smile. That weekend, I couldn't sit still. I cleaned the kitchen twice, reorganized the pantry, folded and refolded laundry that didn't need folding. Every time I stopped moving, my brain replayed the same thought. He built a whole life somewhere else. On Sunday afternoon while he was gone, I sat at the table with my coffee and started digging deeper. I searched Brooks Tailoring and Design, Kansas City. It was a small local shop, women's clothes, alterations, custom dresses. Their website had a photo of the owner. A woman in her 30s with auburn hair and kind eyes. Her name was listed right under it. Owner. Marlene Brooks. The same name. I scrolled further and found a picture of her standing in front of the store with a teenage girl. The caption read, Marlene and her daughter Haley, celebrating 5 years of Brooks Tailoring and Design. Haley. The same handwriting from that birthday card. I didn't need a detective to connect the dots. My husband hadn't been helping a sick sister. He'd been helping himself to a second family. I shut the laptop and sat there in the quiet. I don't know how long I stayed like that. The only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock. Around 5 p.m., Robert called. Hey, just checking in. You good? My voice was steady when I said, Yeah, just tired. He said, I'll be home Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, depends on weather. Okay, I said. Drive safe. I hung up and stared at the phone. He lied so easily, it almost sounded affectionate. That night, I walked into our bedroom and looked around. Everything in that room, our bed, the photos, the clothes, was built on trust. But once that trust was gone, it all looked like props on a stage. The next morning, I packed a small bag, not to leave, not yet, but because I needed air. I drove to a diner on the edge of town and sat in a booth with my notebook open. The waitress refilled my coffee twice before asking, Rough day? I smiled and said, You could say that. I started listing everything I knew. Monthly transfers to Menu Brooks. Kansas City receipts. Joint account. Sister story. Birthday card, signed by Haley. Then I drew a line under it and wrote one question. What else am I missing? I didn't know it yet, but that list would change my life. Later that day, my sister Caroline called. She could hear it in my voice before I said a word. Ev, what's wrong? I told her everything. The card, the bank account, the lies. She listened quietly and then said, You need to find her. Not to fight, not to scream, just to see. I said, See what? The truth, she replied. You deserve to see it for yourself. That idea planted itself in my mind like a seed. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept seeing Marlene's face on that website, smiling in front of her shop, completely unaware or maybe perfectly aware of the life she'd built on top of mine. By sunrise, I'd already made up my mind. Robert was heading out again on Wednesday. He thought I'd stay home like always, waiting for his return. But I'd already checked the bus schedule. There was one leaving for Kansas City at 6:15 a.m. I folded the printed photo of Marlene's shop and slipped it into my purse. My hands didn't shake this time. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was ready to look the truth in the eye, no matter what it cost me. The morning he left for his trip, the house felt quieter than usual. He moved around the kitchen, like a man who had nothing to hide, pouring coffee, checking his phone, humming a song under his breath. I stood at the counter, pretending to pack his lunch, pretending not to see the second phone sticking out of his jacket pocket. He caught me looking at it and smiled. Work phone, he said automatically. I nodded and kissed his cheek goodbye. He walked out, whistling, and I waited until his truck turned the corner before I exhaled. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was steady, determined. I grabbed my purse, notebook, and the folded photo of that shop in Kansas City. For 12 years, I believed everything he said without question. That morning, I realized the only thing worse than being lied to was choosing to stay in the lie once you knew. The bus to Kansas City left at 6:15 a.m. sharp. I sat by the window, watching the gray Iowa sky blur past the glass. Around me, people were chatting, scrolling through their phones, drinking coffee. I sat in silence, replaying his voice in my head. She's my sister, Ev. She's sick. It's just money for her medicine. If I hadn't seen that card, I might have believed him forever. Halfway through the ride, I texted my sister Caroline just once. Me. I'm going to Kansas City. Caroline. Alone? Are you sure? Me. I need to see it with my own eyes. She didn't reply after that. She knew there was nothing else to say. The drive took 6 hours. The closer we got, the heavier the air felt. When the bus finally pulled into the station, I just sat there for a minute, staring out the window. My hands were cold, but my chest felt hot. I wasn't sure if it was anger or adrenaline. I took a cab to the address from the website, Brooks Tailoring and Design, Maple Avenue. The neighborhood was quiet. Small shops, tidy sidewalks, families walking dogs. The kind of place that looked ordinary until you realized your life was about to fall apart there. The taxi stopped in front of a small storefront painted light blue with white trim. The sign above the door was neat and professional. Brooks Tailoring and Design. There were dresses on mannequins in the window. Bridal gowns, school uniforms, prom dresses. Everything about it looked peaceful. That made it worse. I sat there for a long minute before the driver asked, You getting out? Yeah, I said softly. I just need a second. When I finally stepped out, my legs felt unsteady. I walked up to the door, pretending to be just another customer. There was a bell above the entrance that jingled when I pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled like fabric and lavender. Rolls of material lined the walls, and behind the counter was a woman, Marlene Brooks. She looked exactly like the photo online. Late 30s, auburn hair tied back neatly, eyes that looked tired but kind. She smiled politely. Hi there, how can I help you today? For a second, I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring. It wasn't until I noticed the framed photos behind her, one of her and a teenage girl, one of her and a man with his arm around her shoulders, that my throat went dry. The man in the photo was Robert. Not some stranger who looked like him. Not a distant cousin. My husband. I felt the room tilt for a second. The hum of the sewing machines in the back grew louder in my ears. Marlene was still looking at me, waiting for an answer. "I'm sorry," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "I think I have the wrong place." She smiled gently. "No worries. It happens all the time." I turned to leave, and that's when I heard a young voice from the back room. "Mom! Dad's on the phone!" The word dad hit me like a punch. Marlene called back. "Tell him I'll call him right back, sweetie." My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. I stepped outside, the bell jingling behind me, and the sunlight felt too bright. I walked halfway down the block before I realized I was shaking. I sat on a bench and stared at nothing. My husband wasn't just cheating, he wasn't just lying. He was living another life, a real one, with a house, a family, a child who called him Dad. After a few minutes, I stood up and walked back toward the shop. I didn't have a plan, just instinct. The door was still open, and inside, Marlene was now helping a customer. The girl from the photo, Haley, was sitting near the counter doing homework, humming softly. She couldn't have been more than 14. She looked up at me and smiled. "Hi." I swallowed hard. "Hi there." She pointed to a jar on the counter. "You can take a mint if you want. Mom says it helps when people look nervous." I almost laughed. She's probably right. Marlene came over, recognizing me. "Oh, you're back. Did you figure out what you were looking for?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw nothing malicious. Just a woman living a normal life. I wondered if she even knew about me. I said quietly, "Actually, yes. I think I did." She nodded politely, not realizing what I meant. As I walked out again, my reflection caught in the shop window. I barely recognized myself. My hands were steady now. My heart wasn't racing anymore. The truth had finally taken shape, and it was worse than I ever imagined, but also strangely freeing. I didn't need to guess anymore. I didn't need to hope. I pulled out my phone, opened my notebook app, and typed a single line under the list I'd been keeping for weeks. He wasn't helping his sister. He was living with her. Then I took one last look at the shop, the window, the girl, the name on the sign. And I turned away, walking toward the bus station, calm for the first time in months. I should have kept walking that day. I should have gone home, swallowed the truth, and let time do whatever it does with heartbreak. But curiosity is cruel. It doesn't let you turn away once you've seen the edge of something ugly. I was halfway down the block when I stopped, turned back, and walked toward that blue storefront again. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was steady, almost eerily calm, like my body had already accepted what my mind refused to say out loud. When I reached the door, the little brass bell jingled as I pushed it open. Marlene looked up, surprised but still smiling. "Oh, you again," she said warmly. "Did you forget something?" I shook my head. "No, I just wanted to ask you something." She wiped her hands on a cloth and came closer. "Sure, what's up?" Before I could answer, a girl's voice came from the back room again. "Mom, he's here!" The word "he" hit harder this time. A moment later, I heard footsteps, slow, familiar ones. And then he appeared. Robert stepped through the doorway with the same face I'd kissed goodbye that morning. His eyes went wide for a second, then froze like he was trying to process whether what he saw was real. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Marlene looked between us, confused. "You two know each other?" Neither of us spoke. Robert blinked, finally forcing a weak laugh. "Ev, what are you doing here?" Ev. The same nickname he used every day, now sounding like a stranger's voice. "I could ask you the same thing," I said quietly. Marlene looked from him to me. "Wait, Ev?" Her voice broke a little. You said she passed away." The room went dead silent. Even the hum of the sewing machine in the back seemed to stop. Robert's face turned the color of chalk. "Marlene, just—" But she backed away from him, shaking her head. "You told me your wife was dead." My voice came out steadier than I expected. Apparently, I got better. Marlene stared at me like she couldn't decide whether to scream or cry. "He said you died in a car accident years ago. That's why—" Her words trailed off. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Robert rubbed his forehead, muttering, "Ev, I can explain." I cut him off. "You don't have to. I've been explaining for you my whole marriage. Haley stepped out from the back room then, holding a sketchbook. She froze when she saw the three of us. Her bright, curious eyes darted between her mother and Robert. Mom, Dad, what's going on? Marlene quickly guided her toward the stairs. Go upstairs, sweetheart. The girl hesitated but obeyed, glancing back once before disappearing. The sound of her footsteps faded, leaving nothing but that horrible, suffocating silence again. Robert looked at me, desperation creeping into his voice. Ev, it's not what it looks like. I almost laughed. It looks like you have a daughter who calls you Dad. Is that wrong too? He opened his mouth, but the truth was already sitting between us, too big to ignore. Marlene had tears in her eyes, but they weren't for me. They were for the realization that she'd been lied to, too. I looked around the shop at the dresses, the photos, the little notes pinned to the wall, and I realized how completely he'd built this world. It wasn't an affair. It was a second life. Why? I asked finally. Not yelling, not sobbing, just asking. Why bury me? Robert dropped his gaze. I didn't mean to at first. I met her on the road years ago. She thought I was single, and I didn't correct her. Then it went too far, and I couldn't stop it. I didn't know how. I laughed under my breath. You didn't know how to tell the truth? That's one skill you could have practiced instead of lying your way across 2 states. Marlene wiped her eyes and whispered, You told me you were alone. That your wife was gone. She stopped, looking at me. I didn't know. I believed her. Maybe that's what made the whole thing even more pathetic. Robert took a step closer. Ev, please. I'll fix it. I'll end it. Stop. My voice was calm but final. You've already ended it. You just forgot to tell me. He opened his mouth again, but I wasn't interested in hearing more recycled apologies. I turned to Marlene and said quietly, You don't have to apologize for believing him. I did too. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. I know, I said. And I meant it. Robert reached for my arm. Ev, please don't do this here. I looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. You didn't need to bury me to live another life. He froze. For the first time, he didn't have a single word left. I turned toward the door. The bell jingled as I pushed it open, and for a moment, the sound of the street outside felt like air after being underwater. As I walked away, I caught my reflection in the shop window. My face was pale but calm, steady. Behind me, I could see Marlene comforting her daughter. Robert stood there, small and helpless in the doorway of the life he'd chosen. The sky above Kansas City was bright and cloudless, indifferent to what had just happened. I walked without looking back, one step after another, my mind surprisingly clear. There was no anger anymore, no confusion, just the quiet understanding that my marriage had died long before he told anyone I had. When I reached the corner, I stopped to wait for the light to change. A bus passed by, the same route that had brought me there that morning. The driver gave a polite nod as he slowed. I stepped on, found a seat near the window, and finally let out a long breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Outside, the city rolled by, slow and steady. I wasn't thinking about revenge or even closure. I was just thinking about getting home to the version of myself that hadn't needed him to survive. The bus ride home felt longer than the one that took me there. Maybe it was the weight of everything I'd just seen, or maybe it was because I finally knew the truth. Either way, I sat by the window the whole time, staring out at the blur of farmland and thinking about how easy it is for people to live 2 lives when the miles between them are wide enough. When I got back to Des Moines, it was almost dark. I stood in our driveway for a while, staring at the house. The porch light was on, the one he installed last summer. It used to make me feel safe. Now it just looked like a spotlight on a stage I didn't want to perform on anymore. Inside, everything was exactly how I left it. His boots by the door, his jacket on the chair, the faint smell of his cologne still hanging in the hallway. It should have felt like home, but it didn't. It felt borrowed. I dropped my bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the couch, and finally let myself breathe. My hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time. It was like my body was trying to push something out, shock, maybe, or the last bit of denial I'd been clinging to. I poured myself a drink. Not a big one, just enough to stop my brain from spinning. I stared at the wall for a long time, thinking about that little girl's voice calling him Dad. It played in my head over and over, until it stopped hurting and started sounding almost absurd. He had looked at me in that shop like a man who'd been caught stealing something that wasn't his, and in a way, that's exactly what he'd done. He'd stolen years of my life, years I could have spent being free instead of faithful to a lie. The next morning, he called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice too casual, too normal. "How's your day?" I said nothing for a moment. Then, "You should try asking Marlene that." Silence. The kind that stretches so long it starts to hum. He tried to laugh it off. "Ev, don't start with that. I met her," I said, cutting him off. My voice didn't even tremble. "I met your sick sister. She's not sick. She's sewing wedding dresses." There was a pause, and then the faint sound of him exhaling. "Ev, please, just let me explain." "I already did that for you," I said. "For 12 years. He started talking fast, the way people do when they're drowning. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I tried to stop, but you didn't," I finished. He said my name again, quieter this time, but I didn't care. I hung up before he could say another word. The sound of the click felt final, like closing a door that had been left open too long. For the rest of the day, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I cleaned. Every corner, every drawer, every cabinet. It wasn't about the dust, it was about control. I couldn't fix my marriage, but I could damn well make sure my house didn't smell like him anymore. When I got to the closet, I stopped. His shirts were lined up neatly, color-coordinated, like they always were. I ran my hand over the sleeves, wondering which ones he wore when he visited her. The blue one? The gray? Did she buy him that striped one he said he found on sale? I took them all down and stuffed them into a garbage bag. The sound of the hangers clattering on the floor was loud, satisfying. By the time he got home 3 days later, I was ready. Not for a fight, just for the truth. He walked in, pretending everything was normal. "Hey, babe," he said, setting his keys on the counter. "You okay? You sound weird on the phone lately." I looked at him for a long second. Then I said, "You don't have to pretend anymore." He froze. "Ev, I know, Robert. About Marlene, about Haley, about the joint account, about all of it." His face went pale, and for a second, I thought he might actually faint. Then he tried to switch tactics. "It's complicated." "It's not," I said flatly. "You have another family. That's not complicated. That's disgusting." He stepped closer, hands raised like he was calming a wild animal. "Ev, please. I never meant to hurt you." I laughed quietly. "You told her I was dead. You literally buried me to make room for her. Tell me how that's not meant to hurt." "Hauster." His lips parted, but no words came out. I kept going. "You told her you were a widower. You told her your daughter barely remembered her late mother. You let another woman raise your child's half-sister while you played family in 2 cities. He rubbed his face and muttered, "I don't even know how to explain it." "You don't need to," I said. "You're not talking to a jury. You're talking to your wife, at least, for a little while longer." He looked up, eyes wet, voice cracking. "Ev, I'll fix this. I swear I will." I shook my head. "You can't fix dead, Robert. You already killed what we had." He tried to touch my arm, but I stepped back. That one small movement said everything. He didn't follow me when I turned away. He just stood there, defeated, silent. That night, I slept in the guest room. He didn't knock. The next morning, he was gone before sunrise. I didn't even hear the truck start. For the first time in years, I woke up to quiet that didn't feel empty. It felt clean. Like the noise had finally stopped. I walked to the kitchen, made myself coffee, and sat by the window watching the light hit the fence. There was still a mess to deal with: divorce, money, lies, but that morning, for the first time in a long time, I felt something that almost resembled peace. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't revenge. It was just the realization that the worst had already happened, and I was still standing. When you find out your husband has been living a double life, there isn't some dramatic explosion, no screaming match that fixes anything. What really happens is quieter than people think. It's just the sound of something inside you shutting off. After that night, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't even ask why. There was no point. The only thing worse than hearing the truth was listening to him try to twist it into something reasonable. So, I stopped asking. Robert called twice the next morning. I didn't answer. Then he showed up that evening like he hadn't destroyed the foundation of our life. He came in through the back door, the way he always did, holding 2 grocery bags like peace offerings. "I brought dinner," he said softly, setting the bags on the counter. "I figured we should talk." I looked at the bags. Pasta, wine, salad kit, the same meal we'd made on our anniversary. The irony almost made me laugh. He sat down at the table, clasping his hands like he was preparing for a confession. "I know you hate me right now," he began, "but you have to understand, I never wanted this to happen." I didn't look at him. I was washing dishes that were already clean. "You didn't want it, but you kept it going for almost a decade." He sighed. "It just got out of control. At first, it was just helping her. You know me, Ev. I help people." That line hit me harder than I expected, because yes, I did know him, or at least, I thought I did. The man who fixed neighbors' fences, who coached Little League, who always paid his bills early, and apparently, the man who managed to run 2 households without missing a mortgage payment. He rubbed his face, looking tired, older. "When I met Marlene, I didn't tell her about you because, I don't know. It felt good to start over. She was kind, she listened. I kept thinking I'd stop before it went too far." "And then what?" I asked. "You blinked and suddenly you had a child who called you dad?" His head dropped. "It's not like that. It's exactly like that." The silence between us was thick. I could hear the hum of the fridge, the faint tick of the wall clock, the way the house seemed to hold its breath. He finally said, "I told her you were gone because it was easier. I didn't want her to hate me. I didn't want anyone to hate me." "Oh, that's the thing, Robert," I said quietly. "You were too busy managing other people's feelings to notice you were erasing me." He looked up, eyes wide. "Ev, please, you have to believe me, I loved you. I still do." I set the dish towel down, turned, and looked him straight in the eyes. "You don't get to use that word anymore." He didn't respond. He just sat there, defeated, staring at his hands. "I'm done," I said simply. "You can take your food and your excuses and your fake stories about helping people. You're done helping me." He stood slowly. "So that's it?" "That's it." He looked like he wanted to argue, maybe even cry, but he didn't. He just nodded, picked up the grocery bags, and walked out. The back door shut softly behind him, and I stood there in the kitchen, realizing that was the last time I'd ever see him in this house as my husband. That night, I slept better than I expected, not because I was okay, but because I was finally done pretending. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Her name was Sylvia Monroe, a woman my sister recommended. She spoke calmly, directly. "We'll get through this," she said, "but I'll need documentation. Bank records, receipts, anything showing financial misconduct." I almost laughed. "Oh, I've got plenty of that." For weeks, I gathered everything: bank statements, transfers, photos, receipts, every piece of his double life in black and white. I made copies, labeled folders, and by the time I was done, I realized I'd spent more time proving his lies than he probably spent living them. When I met with Sylvia in her office, she flipped through the evidence without blinking. "You've got him," she said. "Joint account, deception, misuse of marital funds, it's all there." Hearing her say that didn't make me happy. It made me tired. I didn't want revenge through paperwork. I just wanted peace. Robert tried to call again. I stopped picking up. Then he started leaving voicemails. Some angry, some desperate. The last one was the quietest. "Ev, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I hope you're happy someday." I deleted it without listening to the end. In the following weeks, I told the kids the truth at least, the version they needed to hear. I said their dad made some mistakes and that things were going to change. They didn't ask many questions. Kids are smart. They can feel when something's broken. I started moving his things into boxes. Every photo, every shirt, every trace of him. It wasn't anger. It was housekeeping. Emotional and literal. I didn't throw them away right away. I just needed them out of sight. When I finally signed the divorce papers, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt blank. Like finishing a long, awful book and realizing you don't even care how it ends anymore. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the porch, watching the sky turn gold and then gray. For 12 years, I'd been Mrs. Robert Carter, the loyal wife, the patient woman, the lucky one. Now, I was just Evelyn Carter again. A woman who got up, taught her students, came home, and learned how to stop caring about a man who buried her alive in someone else's story. And somewhere between the last sip of wine and the sound of crickets outside, I realized something simple. Losing him wasn't the end of my life. It was just the end of his lie. The day he moved out wasn't dramatic. There were no suitcases slammed shut, no neighbors watching from their windows. Just a quiet exchange of boxes and silence. He came in through the back door like always, except this time he didn't have flowers or excuses, just an old duffel bag, and that same nervous smile that used to work on me. He asked, "You sure you don't want to talk one more time?" I didn't even look up from the box I was taping. "We've said everything that matters. The rest is just noise." He nodded slowly, like a man who knew he'd run out of words that could fix anything. For a second, he glanced around the living room, our living room, like he was seeing it for the first time. His eyes landed on a photo on the wall, the four of us at the lake, all smiles, fake and easy. He reached toward it, then stopped himself. "Leave it," I said. "The memories are mine too." He nodded again, the same guilty half-smile plastered on his face. "You've changed, Ev." I looked him dead in the eye. "No, Robert, I just stopped pretending I didn't see you." Almay. He carried his boxes out to the truck. I watched through the kitchen window, not crying, not shaking, just breathing. Each step he took toward that truck felt like a piece of weight lifting off my chest. When the engine started, I thought I'd feel something: grief, relief, anger, but what I felt was stillness, the kind that comes after a long, ugly storm. That night, I made dinner for one. It was quiet, but not lonely. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at the table where he used to sit, and realized something. I'd spent years cooking for a man who had 2 kitchens. I wasn't sad that he was gone. I was sad that it took me so long to let him go. The next morning, I met with Sylvia again to finalize the financial separation. She slid a stack of papers across her desk. "Once you sign these, you're officially free." "How one?" I picked up the pen, stared at the line that said Evelyn Carter, and for the first time, I smiled, signing my name. Sylvia glanced up. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Better than okay." When it was done, she stood and shook my hand. "You know," she said, "most people fall apart when they find out something like this. You didn't." "I did," I said quietly. "Just not where anyone could see." "Over?" I walked out of her office into the bright afternoon light and took the longest, deepest breath I could remember taking. The kind of breath that belongs to someone who survived something without even realizing how strong she was. For the next few weeks, I got busy rebuilding the parts of my life that still belonged to me. I called my credit card companies, set up my own accounts, started looking for a cheaper apartment. I even opened a small savings fund for myself and the kids. Nothing big, just something that was mine alone. Robert tried to call a few more times. Once to check on the kids, another time to make sure the bills were getting paid. I didn't answer. He didn't need to check on anything anymore. The only thing I wanted from him was distance. It was strange at first, waking up in a quiet house. No early morning texts, no fake goodnight calls, no empty promises. Just me, my coffee, and the sound of a home that finally belonged to one honest person. People at work started to notice a difference. "You seem lighter," one of my coworkers said. I smiled. "Yeah, I guess lies are heavy." After school one day, I took my daughter Lisa for ice cream. She didn't ask much about her dad, but as we sat there, she said, "Mom, you're smiling more now." That stopped me for a second. "You noticed?" She nodded, licking her spoon. "Yeah, you used to look tired all the time." I laughed. "That's because I was." That night, I wrote a list in my journal, not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd gained. Freedom, peace, clarity, silence that didn't hurt. But peace is a strange thing. When you finally have it, it makes room for thoughts you didn't expect. I started wondering what would happen to Marlene when she found out the rest of the truth. Not about me, but about the man she thought she knew. I didn't hate her. Oddly enough, I pitied her. She believed the same man I did, just at a different point in his life. And now, she was going to learn the same lesson, the hard way. One morning, I opened my laptop to check my email. There it was a new message from his company. The subject line read, "Employee termination, Robert Carter." I clicked it, not out of curiosity, but closure. He'd been fired for misconduct using company property for personal reasons. I almost laughed. It was poetic, really. The man who lived a double life couldn't keep his job for doing the same thing. I closed the laptop, poured another cup of coffee, and looked out the window. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come home. I wasn't checking my phone or guessing which city my husband might be lying in. My life was mine again. Simple, quiet, honest. That night, I packed up the last of his things, the ones I'd shoved into the garage weeks ago, and set them by the door. Old shirts, framed photos, a pair of boots. I didn't burn them, or smash them, or do anything dramatic. I just left them there. When the garbage truck came the next morning, I watched from the window as the driver tossed the box into the back without hesitation. The sound it made, a dull thud, wasn't sad or angry, it was final. And, as I stood there, coffee in hand, the sunlight spilling into the kitchen, I finally understood what freedom really felt like. It wasn't walking away from him. It was walking back to myself. It's strange how quiet a house can feel after someone leaves it for good. I used to think silence was something lonely people suffered through, but I learned it could also be something you earn, something that comes after chaos, like the still air after a storm. Robert was gone, but his shadow lingered everywhere. Not in a haunting way, just in the small, irritating details he'd left behind. His favorite mug, his socks that somehow always escaped the laundry, that ridiculous wrench he swore I'd never know how to use. I started throwing things out one at a time, not out of anger but practicality. The man was gone. I didn't need his leftovers cluttering my new life. Bills started arriving in my name alone. That felt good. I changed the Wi-Fi password, closed the joint account, and transferred every dollar that was legally mine into a new one with a name that only belonged to me. E. Carter. Simple, clean, unshared. Of course, people started asking questions. At work, one of the teachers whispered, "I haven't seen your husband around lately." I smiled politely. "Yeah, he's not around much anymore." She gave me that look people give when they want gossip but don't have the nerve to ask. I didn't owe her a story. The neighbors noticed too. The man next door, Dave, offered to mow my lawn until Robert got back. I told him thanks, but I'd handle it. There's something empowering about yanking a pull cord and feeling the engine roar under your own strength. I hadn't realized how many things I'd quietly outsourced to a man who wasn't even living honestly. The divorce paperwork moved fast. Sylvia, my lawyer, called to say Robert hadn't contested anything. "He's being cooperative," she said. "Good," I replied. "He's practiced at pretending to care." Then came the day I had to face him one last time in court. He showed up in a wrinkled shirt, holding a folder like it might save him. I walked in wearing the same calm I'd worn since Kansas City. He didn't meet my eyes at first. When he finally did, it was the look of a man realizing too late that guilt isn't love. The judge didn't need much convincing. The financial evidence, the joint account, the lies, it was all laid out neatly. There was no drama, no shouting. Just a gavel, a signature, and a quiet end to 12 years of pretending. Afterward, he followed me out into the parking lot. "Ev, please," he said, voice low. "I know you hate me, but—" I stopped walking. "You're wrong, I don't hate you." He blinked, confused. "You don't?" "No," I said. "Hate takes energy. You're not worth that anymore." He stood there, mouth slightly open, and for the first time, I think he understood. There's nothing more terrifying to a man like him than indifference. A week later, the company he worked for sent me an email, apparently, Someone reported him for misuse of company funds. His firing was official. The irony wasn't lost on me. He lost everything he'd tried to build because he couldn't stop lying about the simplest things. Meanwhile, my life kept moving. I got up, went to work, made dinner, paid bills, laughed with my kids. Normal things that suddenly felt brand new because they belonged to me again. I started sewing again, too, something I hadn't done in years. At first, it was just hemming curtains and fixing buttons, but soon I found myself designing small pieces, simple dresses, custom aprons. It felt grounding, like therapy without words. One afternoon, Lisa walked in while I was sewing at the kitchen table. "Mom," she said, "can you teach me how to do that?" I looked up, surprised. "You want to learn to sew?" She nodded. "You look happy when you do it." I know. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was showing my daughter how to rebuild hers someday if she ever had to. I started taking small orders from neighbors, then from their friends. It wasn't about the money, though it helped. It was about creating something out of pieces. Stitch by stitch, fabric by fabric, I was turning scraps into something useful, something new. One evening, while I was working on an order, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was neat, unfamiliar. It was from Marlene. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a short note written in shaky pen strokes. "I didn't know about you. I swear I didn't. I thought he was honest. I've left him. I hope one day we can both stop being angry at the same man. Marlene." I sat there for a minute, holding that letter. My first instinct was to tear it up, but I didn't. Instead, I folded it neatly and set it aside. I wasn't angry at her. Not anymore. She was a victim of the same lie, just dressed differently. A few days later, I got another message, this time from his mother. "He's been staying with me," she said. "He's not doing well." I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But pity doesn't erase betrayal. It just reminds you that people who lie that easily will always destroy themselves eventually. That night, I sat on the porch again. Same place, same view, but this time the air felt different. Lighter. The street was quiet, the stars clear, and for once, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what I still had. My kids, my peace, my independence. I didn't know it yet, but that calm I was feeling wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of something new. I just didn't realize that peace could be louder than revenge ever could. Starting over sounds brave when you say it out loud, but in real life, it's mostly confusing. There's no roadmap for how to rebuild after someone's betrayal. You just wake up one morning, stare at the ceiling and think, "Okay, it's just me now. What the hell do I do with that?" The first few weeks after the divorce were quiet, almost too quiet. The kids were with my sister for a bit so I could get settled, which was her nice way of saying, learn how to be alone without falling apart. I didn't fall apart, though. I did what teachers do best. I made lists. Lists of bills, lists of goals, lists of things I wanted to forget. The top of one list read, "Do something that's mine." That's how the sewing started. I'd always been decent with a needle, but I'd never really thought much of it. My mother taught me when I was little how to fix hems, how to line up stitches straight, how to iron fabric so it looks brand new. She used to say sewing was about patience, not perfection. I didn't understand what that meant until I found myself sitting at the kitchen table late one night, sewing just to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't wander back to him. It started small, patching a neighbor's torn apron, fixing a ripped sleeve for a coworker. Then one of them asked, "Ev, could you make something from scratch?" I laughed and said, "Sure, but don't blame me if it turns out crooked." It didn't. It turned out beautiful. That's how the idea for a small business started forming in my head. Nothing big, nothing fancy. Just a way to use my hands for something honest. I called it Second Stitch Studio. The name came to me one night while I was ironing fabric. It fit perfectly because that's what I was doing, stitching my life back together, one clean line at a time. I turned the old guest room into a workspace. Moved in a table, a rack for fabrics, a corkboard for orders. I opened an Etsy page with help from Lisa, my 13-year-old tech expert, and we uploaded photos of my first few creations. Within a week, I got 3 orders, then 10, then 20. It wasn't about the money. It was about watching something grow that wasn't built on lies. Around the same time, I started volunteering at a local community center. They had a Skills for Women program classes for single mothers and women who'd been through rough situations. I offered to teach sewing twice a week. Most of the women came in nervous, saying things like, "I can't even sew a button." But by the end of the first session, they were laughing, holding up crooked stitches like trophies. One woman, Clarissa, said something that stuck with me. "You know, it's not really about the sewing," she said, grinning. "It's about having control over something again, even if it's just fabric." She was right. Some nights, after the workshops, I'd sit on the porch with my coffee, watching the lights across the street flicker on one by one. I didn't feel lonely anymore. Just steady. The kind of steady that comes from building something no one can take from you. Robert called once during that time. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. "Ev," he said softly, "I heard you started some kind of business." "Yeah," I replied. "It's called Second Stitch." "Ode?" "That's good," he said awkwardly. "I'm glad you're doing okay." I didn't respond. Then he said, "You sound different." "I am different," I said. "You buried the old me years ago. I figured I might as well start over." He sighed. "I deserve that." "You deserve a lot of things," I said. "But none of them involve me anymore." He didn't call again. Months passed. The business grew slowly but steadily. I started getting custom orders from other states. A woman from Colorado sent me an email saying, "Your designs feel peaceful, like they have a story." She didn't know how right she was. Lisa and Noah helped me with packaging and photos. On weekends, we'd play music, make dinner together, and laugh about little things. For the first time, my kids were seeing a version of me that wasn't exhausted, waiting for someone else's approval. One evening, while I was sewing, Lisa asked, "Do you ever miss Dad?" I thought about it. "I miss who I thought he was," I said finally. "But the man he turned out to be? No, I don't miss him at all." She nodded quietly, then went back to helping me tie ribbons on finished orders. I could tell she understood more than she let on. A few weeks later, Sylvia, my lawyer-turned friend, stopped by to drop off some legal documents. She looked around at the workshop, smiling. "You built this from nothing," she said. "Not from nothing," I corrected. "From broken pieces." She laughed. "Same thing, really." We sat down for coffee, and she asked if I'd ever thought about sharing my story. "You'd be surprised how many women would see themselves in it," she said. I shook my head. "Maybe someday. Right now, I just want to live it." That night, after she left, I looked around my little studio. The hum of the sewing machine, the smell of coffee, the soft music playing in the background, it all felt right. Not perfect, not easy, but right. Starting over hadn't been about reinventing myself. It was about coming home to the version of me that existed before the lies, before the pretending. And as I stood there, running my hands over the fabric, I realized that peace doesn't come in big moments. It comes in small ones, the sound of a straight stitch, the click of scissors, the quiet certainty that you've survived something that was meant to break you. That's when I knew. I hadn't just started over. I'd started living. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. The kind of day when life feels almost boring in the best way. I'd just finished teaching my sewing class at the community center when my phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "Unknown number." Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Evelyn?" The voice was soft, shaky. "This is Marlene." For a second, I froze. Her name still had weight, like a word I hadn't said out loud in years. I took a breath. "Hi, Evan. I know this is strange," she said quickly, "but I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For not destroying me when you could have." Her voice cracked slightly. "When I found out about you, I thought you'd hate me. But you didn't. You just left. You let me find out the rest on my own." There was a long pause. I didn't know what to say. Finally, I said, "I didn't hate you, Marlene. You were living the same lie I was." She exhaled, relieved. "I didn't know about you, Evelyn." "I swear I didn't. He told me you died. He even showed me an old photo of you and said you were his late wife. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. I sat down at the edge of the table, feeling that strange mix of anger and pity wash over me again. You don't have to explain, I said quietly. I used to believe him too. I just wanted you to know, she continued. He's gone. Left me and Haley. No warning, no money, just disappeared. That didn't surprise me. A man who lives two lives doesn't stick around for the cleanup. She hesitated before asking, Do you know any lawyer who handles this kind of thing? I smiled faintly, almost in disbelief at the full circle moment. Yes, I said. I'll connect you with someone who helped me. That's how I introduced her to Sylvia Monroe. Within a few days, they met, and Sylvia later told me, she's trying her best. You two are more alike than you think. I didn't doubt it. A few weeks later, Marlene drove to Des Moines to meet me in person. I wasn't sure how it would go, whether we'd sit in awkward silence or cry or just avoid eye contact entirely. Instead, it felt calm. Two women who'd walked through the same fire, now sitting across from each other in the ashes, realizing they'd both survived. We met at a small cafe near the library. She looked different from what I expected. Tired, yes, but kind. She had the eyes of someone who'd learned her lessons the hard way. When she walked in, she smiled nervously. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure you'd call, I said, smiling back. We ordered coffee, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she took out a small envelope and slid it across the table. This is from Haley, she said. I opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing colored markers, bright and messy, the kind kids make with too much heart. It showed a woman at a sewing machine, smiling, surrounded by little hearts. Underneath, in shaky handwriting, it said, Thank you for helping my mom. Love, Haley. I blinked a few times, trying not to tear up. She drew this? Marlene nodded. She knows about you now. Not everything, of course, but enough to understand you helped us when you didn't have to. I folded the drawing gently and smiled. She's a good kid. She is, Marlene said softly. I just hope she grows up knowing what honesty looks like. We talked for over an hour. About life, about lies, about the strange sisterhood that comes from being betrayed by the same man. She told me she'd started working part-time at a tailor shop to make ends meet. It's funny, she said. I can sew, but I'm terrible at patching up my own life. I laughed. You're doing fine. You just need the right thread. That made her laugh too. The kind of laugh that comes from exhaustion and relief all at once. When we finished our coffee, she stood and said, You know, I used to think you were the enemy. I smiled. I used to think you were the reason my life fell apart. Turns out, we were both just characters in his story. She nodded, eyes glossy. Then I guess it's time we write our own. We hugged before parting ways. It wasn't dramatic, just two women quietly forgiving what neither of them caused. That night, when I got home, I placed Haley's drawing on my sewing table. It looked perfect there, next to the spools of thread and the little sign that said, Second Stitch Studio. I couldn't stop staring at it, because that drawing wasn't just a thank you, it was proof that something good had grown out of something awful. Weeks later, Sylvia called to tell me she'd been invited to a community panel on financial betrayal, women sharing stories about deception, rebuilding, and survival. She asked if I'd join. My first instinct was to say no. I didn't want to be the woman whose husband lied. But then I thought of Marlene, of Haley, of all the women who'd walked into my sewing class feeling small, ashamed, or invisible, so I said yes. When the night of the event came, the room was filled with women, different ages, faces, stories, but the same tired, brave eyes. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath and said, I'm not here to talk about him. I'm here to talk about what happens after. Because betrayal doesn't just end a story, it gives you a chance to start a new one. When I looked up, I saw Marlene in the crowd, smiling through tears. After the event, she came up to me and said, You were right. Peace does sound louder than revenge. And for the first time in a long time, I felt it too. Not the kind of peace that forgets, but the kind that forgives and keeps walking forward anyway. I never thought peace could be so loud. Not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that fills your chest until there's no room left for bitterness. It didn't happen overnight. It came little by little through long mornings with coffee, laughter from my daughter, and the hum of my sewing machine in the background. 2 years had passed since the day everything fell apart. If someone had told me then that I'd feel gratitude for what happened, I would have laughed in their face. But now, standing in my little studio surrounded by fabric, light, and quiet joy, I understood what people meant when they said pain can be a teacher. The studio had grown more than I ever imagined. What started as a side project had turned into a small but steady business. Women from all over the Midwest ordered custom pieces. Some even came to learn from me in person. I taught them not just to sew, but to rebuild thread by thread, moment by moment. One morning, while packaging an order, I noticed a small envelope tucked between 2 fabrics. It wasn't one I recognized. I opened it carefully. The handwriting was neat, a little childish. Dear Mrs. Carter, thank you for helping my mom and me when we were scared. She says you're brave. I hope I can be brave like you. Love, Haley. I sat down, holding the letter for a long time. The last time I saw that little girl's drawing, I'd pinned it to my sewing board as a reminder that good things could come from broken ones. Now she was writing letters of her own, learning from the strength of women her father had hurt. It was funny how life worked that way. Later that day, I took the letter outside and sat on the porch. The air smelled like rain, soft and clean. Lisa joined me with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She was taller now, older, sharper around the edges but softer in her voice. She looked at me and said, "You know, Mom, you never really talk about Dad anymore." I smiled. "That's because he doesn't live here in my head or in my heart." She nodded thoughtfully. "I think that's a good thing." "It is," I said. "You can't build peace if you keep inviting ghosts to stay for dinner." She laughed, sipping her drink. "You should write that down. Sounds like something you'd tell your students." Maybe I will." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while. The kind of quiet that used to make me feel lonely now just felt full. The sky turned that golden color right before sunset, the light spilling across the porch in long stripes. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone to walk through the door. I wasn't checking my phone or wondering who was lying to me. I was just there present, whole, free. A few days later, I got a call from Sylvia. She said, "You might want to read the news. Your ex made headlines." I almost laughed. "What did he do this time?" "He's being investigated for tax fraud," she said flatly. "Apparently, he didn't learn much about keeping his accounts separate." I thanked her for letting me know, but honestly, I didn't feel much of anything. No anger, no triumph, just a strange calm. The kind that comes when justice takes care of itself, without your help. After we hung up, I sat back at my desk and wrote a note on a scrap of paper. The universe keeps its own books. You just have to stop chasing the receipts. I taped it above my sewing machine as a reminder. That weekend, I took a drive out to a nearby lake, the same one we used to visit years ago, when life still looked perfect from the outside. The air was cool, the water still. I parked by the edge, got out, and stood there watching the ripples. It was the same place where I once thought my life had ended. Now it felt like where it had quietly begun again. I thought about all the versions of me that existed along the way, the wife who trusted too easily, the woman who cried quietly into her pillow, the one who found courage to walk away, and the one sitting there now, smiling at the reflection of a life, finally her own. Sometimes revenge isn't a grand act. It's not a courtroom win or a dramatic confrontation. It's waking up every morning without fear, without needing closure from someone who never had the courage to give it. Before heading back to the car, I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the lake, the sunlight breaking across the water. Later, I posted it to my business page with a short caption. "Peace isn't something you find. It's something you make, stitch by stitch." The post got more comments than I expected. Women shared their own stories, some about betrayal, others about survival. One wrote, "You're right, peace is revenge." That line stuck with me, because that was exactly what it was. Back home, I hung Haley's new letter beside the old drawing. The 2 pieces of paper looked like bookends on a story I'd already finished reading. When I turned off the lights and walked toward my room, I stopped for a second in the doorway and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to life, for letting me get here. I don't think of myself as a victim anymore. I'm not even sure survivor fits. I'm just a woman who learned how to live without fear, without noise, without lies. And maybe that's all I ever needed to be. As I lay in bed that night, the hum of the ceiling fan filling the room, I thought about that line I'd told Sylvia years ago. He didn't have to bury me to live another life. Turns out, I dug myself back out, and the view up here was worth every scar. Peace wasn't the end of my story. It was the point all along. If you've ever been through something like this, if you've ever carried the weight of lies, or loved someone who turned out to be a stranger, remember this: you don't have to get even, you just have to get free. Because sometimes, peace is revenge. And if stories like this one speak to you, real stories of strength, betrayal, and healing, make sure to subscribe. This channel is where we tell cheating stories, revenge stories, and the truth about husband betrayal that so many people live through but rarely talk about. Stay with me, because every ending has its quiet victory.